I am a happiness researcher, and I am not happy all the time. Sometimes in the literature, it's referred to as like the dark side of happiness, where what we see is that people who try to be happy all of the time end up being less happy than other people.
Do you think we can get to those levels of like satisfaction and feeling content and meaningful without the struggle?
Can we be happier than we are right now? Absolutely. Can we be happy all of the time? Absolutely not. A happy life doesn't mean that hard things don't happen, that difficult things don't happen, that job losses don't happen, divorces don't happen, pandemics don't happen. A happy life means that as we start to build our happiness muscle, our highs get higher. It's not that stressors don't happen, like they persist. But what can increase is your capacity to handle them.
Welcome back to the U Potential Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Gillian Mandich. She's spent her career proving that happiness isn't something that you just find. Instead, it's something that you build over time. She's one of Canada's leading researchers on happiness, and today she's here to talk to us about why trying to be happy all the time is probably the thing that's making you unhappy and holding you back. Today, our conversation is how to have a happier life and embrace the struggles and the good times. This is the U Potential Podcast. My name is Sean Maslick, and before we head into this episode, please subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Dr. Gillian Mandich. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gillian Mandich.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I am happy as well because we're going to talk about happiness.
That's right.
But before we get into your research, I thought we would explore what your French bulldog, Jocko, knows about happiness that maybe you didn't know.
Oh, okay. He knows a lot. He is such a good teacher because he's a 41-pound French bulldog.
How
He's
tall?
big.
Like,
He's you can meet him after. He's probably from the table about this tall. He's a big boy. And even coming here today, it's cold. He has to wear the boots, like the boots they have for the dogs because there's so much salt on the sidewalk, and he doesn't like it. And he just refuses to walk. And so I have to carry him, and then he walks slower than a turtle pace. And so this guy, I'm like, go, go, go. I power walk everywhere. And this bulldog, he teaches me about slowing down and patience. And then also because I'm so slow, I start to notice the environment around me more. So he just really brings me into the moment, very present. And he snorts all the time. And he's so playful and fun, and he just brings out that like innate joy. He was just downstairs like running after a ball, and just the pure joy of that. Like I just sometimes if I'm stressed out or something, I look over and he's just like doing something silly, and it just makes me laugh. And he just brings me so much happiness.
it seems like Jocko's story tells us that there's so much happiness around us that we just walk by every day.
Exactly, right? Because you're just focused on where you need to go or where you come from or what's going on. And Jocko actually, so he's a busy guy. He has 2 jobs. He models for a dog brand called Canada Pooch. He was wearing their boots today. And then I take him on Tuesdays to CAMH, to the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. So it's the largest mental health hospital in the country. And he volunteers in pet therapy. And so they have dogs all throughout the hospital, and Jocko works in crisis and critical care. So someone comes to CAMH in psychiatric crisis. They go to his unit, and he just goes every Tuesday, and he just goes to bring joy to the patients there. And watching, there's someone who's in psychiatric crisis get down and like pet a dog, and they'll give him treats or take him for a walk down the hall. Like you just see how much that brightens their day and shifts their mood, and it's pretty incredible.
He's a busy guy.
He's a busy guy. He has his own color in my GCal.
Well, what is it about dogs that therapy they do? I've heard research in the well-being space on how dogs actually do bring enduring levels of satisfaction. I think it was contingent on that you can actually take care of the dog.
Yeah.
But what is it about dogs that help humans feel good?
So you're correct about, you want to make sure that you're able to care for the animal. The other thing is a lot of this research is with people who like dogs. So if you're not a dog person, you don't see the same benefits. But if you are someone that loves dogs or loves animals, from a physiological perspective, we see that even just engaging with them, petting them can reduce like cortisol. It can increase oxytocin, that cuddling, bonding hormone, um, stress reduction, fun, play. I see it every week at CAMH. You really just see that. And there is actually some fun research that even if you can't interact physically with an animal, even watching like videos or seeing pictures, not as much benefit, but still not nothing. So, if you don't have a dog, I get stopped multiple times per walk with people that want to pet Jocko or, take a picture of him. He's really cute. The other good, happy sort of side effect of that, consequence, benefit, is that oftentimes when we think about social connection, which is such a big predictor, the number one predictor of both our long-term health and our happiness, but often when we think about connection, we think about our best friend or a family member. But there's also what we call in research weak, like WEAK, weak ties. So that's the conversation with the barista or the person stopping me asking, what's my dog's name? How old is he? All those little sort of micro interactions are also a big contributor to our feeling of connection and our feeling of being a part of a community. And so a dog is a really easy way to go up to a stranger and have a conversation and to get some of those weak ties in the connection department.
I haven't heard the term weak connections like that
Weak
before.
ties, yeah.
Or ties.
They always have to have fancy words for things in research.
Yeah. but we all know those moments, whether like you're saying the coffee shop or our family did get a dog recently.
What kind?
A Labradoodle.
Oh, cute.
There's something wrong with me because I'm not totally. I actually think something's wrong with me, but I mean, I got 2 young kids.
Yeah.
Like, life's busy, and this dog like adores my wife. But walking him to school with the kids, so many more weak or micro interactions that never happened before because they want to pet the dog.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it really matters. And it's weird, those weak micro interactions actually start to turn into little like I wouldn't say rituals, but every day it's the same people.
Exactly. Like there's a park across the street from my house. And so I take Jocko out multiple times per day. And it's funny because you start to know the dogs, but you don't know the owners' names, right? It's like, this is Theodore's mom.
Yeah.
But so you start to see, because most people have a schedule and a routine with the dogs. So to your point, you actually start to see the same people. And it's just a great way to start to build that sense of, and like I live downtown Toronto. It can feel very lonely and isolating, and to have a community where I even have a couple girls in my building. We all have dogs. So sometimes at 5 o'clock, we'll just go to the park together. But if I'm running late, they will take Jocko out. Or if they're running late or they're going somewhere, I'll take their dog. So we sort of have this community that's all sort of brought together by the dog.
What I find neat is you're talking about Jocko goes slow.
Yeah.
And looks around. It reminds me of like the idea of savoring. And I find myself struggling to savor the little moments because we're searching for the big ones.
Yeah.
But I think the dogs slow us down, like Jocko's walking to savoring. What do you know about savoring that is so important for humans?
Oh, I love savoring. So savoring is, again, fancy words in research, sort of the term for like stopping to smell the roses, right? To actually be present with that cup of coffee in the morning. Or if you're walking, it's freezing cold outside. But when I was walking here, since I was being forced to be present because of Jocko, at one point the sun was out and I could feel the sun on my face and it just felt warm. And I just, enforced slow patience walking, was able to savor this beautiful moment of feeling the sun on my skin in the middle of like freezing cold downtown Toronto. So savoring is really great because it brings us into the present moment. It allows us to stop, notice, and appreciate things that are good and that we enjoy. And it's really interesting because often when we think about happiness, we think about like the big shiny moments, right? We think about, the wedding or the graduation or the party. But when we actually look at like what constitutes and how do we actually build and live a happy life, it really comes down to what Dr. Barbara Fredrickson calls micro moments. So these small little, and micro in terms of small, in terms of effort, not impact. And so savoring is a great way to create a micro moment. And the other really good thing about savoring is it creates what we call an upward spiral of positive emotion. So, I mean, I'm sure many of you listening, myself included, are more familiar with like the downward spirals where you have like one thought and then like the world is ending or you're dying. But they go the other way too. And so to have this moment of, feeling joy or peace or contentment, it starts to shift your mood. You have a little bit of pep in your step after that. You maybe respond a little bit nicer in your next email that you're sending or something. And so it's just it doesn't cost anything to do,
It's
right?
free.
That's the other thing. And when you if you think back to some of your fondest moments, often it's the little things that we remember, right? Like, Jocko, like one of the things, in the morning, he'll come and he'll cuddle with me on the couch and he puts his chin. French bulldogs do this thing called a chin resto. So they like to rest their chin on things. So he comes and he always rests his chin on my shin. And I'm like, that can't be comfortable. But it's just, when I think about him, like it's the little moments like that I'm just like savoring the moment, taking it in. Is what we often remember, even though we're so busy focused on the big things.
It's crazy. I remember years, like 10 years ago, I still do this. I said 10 years ago, but I'm a human. I still do it. But I distinctly remember my kid was like 6 months old. He's 9 now. And I was like doing emails and working late at night. In my head, I was telling myself a story. Like, I got to make this money and so that my kid's going to have a bright future and I'm going to be financially responsible with him and we're going to have so much time. I was like, wait, like he's laying on the ground right there. I can have all the time I want right now, as opposed to, like you're talking about, thinking about the thing that's the big thing way off in the future, whether that's a retirement or big trip with my kid. Just enjoy those micro moments.
Oh, yeah, and the things that we take for granted. And so savoring allows us to actually acknowledge and appreciate a lot of those things. Like even again, Jocko being a teacher. So last January, Jocko started his urine stream when he was peeing started to get slow. And so we thought he had a prostate issue. So I neutered him and then it didn't get better. So we ended up finding out he had a bladder stone lodged in his urethra. And so he had to go for surgery. And so leading up to the surgery, every single time he went to the bathroom, though, if the stone moved and fully blocked his urethra, he would have to go in for emergency surgery. So every time I took him out, it's supposed to be like the de-stressing time when you walk your dog. But I was always so anxious until he went to the bathroom because I was afraid like he might be rushed to the hospital right now. And so since then, every time I take Jocko out and he goes to the bathroom, I like celebrate that. Like, how did I get to a world? But I actually like just the little his health, right?
Yeah.
Taking it for granted and then learning to really like appreciate some of those little things. This guy,
I get the sense you love your Jocko.
I'm obsessed with my dog. Yes.
Well, Jocko's taught us to savor, and I think it's very important to savor those micro moments, but we do celebrate the big moments. I think they pull us towards something, not to, I guess, blind us from all the little micro moments along the way. Let's go back to a big moment. Is it true that your mom hooded you to get your PhD?
You're good. Yes. Wow. When I was listening to some of your podcast episodes before, I was listening to one with Tal Ben Shahar, and you had like the most amazing questions.
Oh,
Here you are doing it again. So yes, 3 times actually.
3 times.
So for those of you listening, like, what are they talking about? When you go to graduation convocation at the university, you walk on the stage and then they take the hood on your gown and they put it over your head. And if your family or someone you know is on faculty, they were allowed to come out and hood you. And so my mom, actually, she just retired, but she was also in health science. She has a bunch of roles. She was like a vice provost. She was a dean in health science, a director of OT. So she worked at Western, and so she actually got to hood me for I did all 3 of my degrees at Western, and she did her PhD at Western too.
Yeah.
So it was really meaningful. She actually got to hood me for all 3 of them. Yeah.
So you said it was meaningful. What was it like in that moment? Not reflecting back, but if you can recall that exact moment.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm the oldest of 7 kids. My mom had 7
Don't you
kids.
just collect degrees?
I think we might have the record for family with most amount of degrees from Western. Like I was born with a Western. I think we might have more than that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we definitely have more than that. I had to add it up for a article in one of the Western papers a little while ago. But so my mom had 7 children in 9 years, no twins, and then she went back to school and did her PhD.
The math on that.
7 kids, 9 years.
Okay.
My brother and I are 11 months apart. And
Irish twin.
yeah, and so I'm the oldest. So when I got into my PhD, I kind of knew what was going to happen because I watched my mom get hers.
Yeah, that's.
And how hard 7 kids under 9 and you're doing a PhD. And then I love spelling and grammar, always have. And so my mom was actually writing her dissertation when I was in high school.
Wow.
And so I got to edit my mom's PhD, and it was about metacognition. And so I've been thinking about thinking for a very long time. But just like I saw the work that my mom put into it. And then I was at Western for 12 years. So PhDs normally take 4 years, but I used to study childhood obesity. halfway through my PhD, I learned that studying happiness was a thing.
Mm.
And I was in health science. All my degrees are in health science because I've always been most passionate about like how do we live like really healthy, happy lives. And so I learned that studying happiness was a thing. And then I went to PubMed and I started reading all this research about the connection between happiness and health. And when we compare happy people to less happy people are physically healthier. They have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, they have stronger immune systems, they heal faster from injury, they make better nutritional choices. And so because I switched into happiness, I basically had to restart my PhD. My coursework carried over, but nothing else. And then it was a bit of a difficult struggle for a while because there was nobody studying happiness at Western. And so we had to figure all that out. So I was actually at Western, took me 12 years to get 3 degrees. So it was a long haul. And so to kind of come to the end of the road and have my mother meet me there and have her gone through getting a PhD, it was so really, really just layered with meaning.
Yeah. You talk about your hard road, but I can imagine she had a hard road with seven kids.
Yeah.
While doing a PhD, while raising the kids, and here you guys are meeting on the stage.
Same university too. Yeah. We wore matching regalia. So one of my friends is a photographer. So she bought her regalia because she goes to convocation all the time, but most of you just rent it for the day.
Yeah.
And so I booked a photo shoot right after so that we could do pictures in our matching outfits because it was just like I really wanted to like capture the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's special. And she's retired.
She just retired in December. Oh, I think she's emeritus now. So I think because now they're at the phase where now all the kids are having kids. And so their house has become a bit of a daycare. So I think she wants a little bit of work still to not get out into the world. But she's taken up golf. So
okay, I was curious that she sounds like a very ambitious woman, raising 7 kids, doing a PhD, working at the university, and then to retire really quickly. I've often seen like there's this identity crisis that people have, but it sounds like she's
and it's not even an identity crisis when we look at the data. And we look at mortality, if people don't have some sort of purpose or meaning outside of their work, there's good Japanese data that followed people for 8 years post-retirement. And so in Japan, they have this concept called Ikigai. It's fun to say, but it basically comes down from 2 words, sort of the reason for living. And so if work was the sole reason that you live and now that's gone, you actually see a physical toll on people. So, no matter what stage you're at, my dad retired a couple years ago. He's a fire captain and he took up woodworking. So, fine. And then they get a lot of meaning and purpose from the grandchildren and from all that sort of stuff as well. But, really making like, where am I finding meaning and purpose in life? And again, like we talked about happiness, big sort of little things, meaning and purpose. Yes, there's those big overarching things, but the friendships that are important to us that we take the time to nurture, or the taking my dog to volunteer at the hospital, all those other little pieces of meaning too, no matter where we are in the lifespan, is something to really sort of consider and make sure that we get clear on and that we sort of figure out what that is for us.
How do you look at the difference between meaning and happiness?
So this is the funny thing. Researchers are funny and they like to fight about a lot of things and get stuck in the weeds. And so the definition of happiness is one of those things. And so the definition that I use is sort of a broader one. And you've talked about this on the podcast before. I listened to your conversation. But essentially, I look at happiness having 2 pieces, a cognitive component and an affective component. And so there's the cognitive, like overall, how do I evaluate my life, the meaning, the purpose piece. And then the sort of little moments of joy or contentment or elation or delight, and sort of collectively together we get a picture of happiness. So meaning is a big contributor to our overall happiness, but what separates happiness from something like joy is that it has the affective component but also that cognitive component. Daniel Kahneman always kind of talked about being happy in your life and with your life. So how do I feel in my life and then sort of overall with my life? Because I would say I'm generally a pretty happy person, but I'm not happy all the time. So just to clear that up for listeners, I am a happiness researcher and I am not happy all the time, but nor do I wish to be. Because that's the other thing, is that when you look at the research, sometimes in the literature it's referred to as like the dark side of happiness, where what we see is that people who try to be happy all of the time end up being less happy than other people. And I was sort of confused by this when I first read this work, but I thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, if it's impossible to be happy all the time, which it is, and your goal is to be happy all the time, then what have you done? You've set an impossible goal.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't reach our goals, we often, if we look at our self-talk and we maybe lack some self-compassion. And so can we be happier than we are right now? Absolutely. Can we be happy all of the time? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my work really focuses on, I often think about happiness like a muscle. And so if you go into the gym and you do like one bicep curl, it's not changing your life, right? But if you go over time and you put in the reps, these micro moments, right? If you think about a micro moment like a rep, over time, your muscle gets stronger. And that's what happens with happiness. And so if you sort of imagine a graph, you start to see your happiness go up. But the other key thing about happiness is a happy life doesn't mean that hard things don't happen, that difficult things don't happen, that job losses don't happen, divorces don't happen, pandemics don't happen. A happy life means that as we start to build our happiness muscle, our highs get higher. And it's not that those lows go away, but they get higher too, because we are more resilient and we're better able to cope with hard things when they happen. I use a lot of fitness metaphors because I love fitness. But it's like the weights don't get, when you walk into the gym, it's not that weights get stronger or lighter, pardon me, right? You get stronger.
Right. Yeah.
And in life, it's not that stressors don't happen, like they persist. But what can increase is your capacity to handle them. And so what we do know from research is that we can focus on that. And just like any other skill, a big piece of happiness is like a skill-based learned behavior. It's like a habit.
It's making me think of this whole study of happiness, or not the study, sorry, the people aspiring to be happy, of think something's wrong if I'm not feeling happy, and that's where you fail. Hoxie Workman, he's a musician from this area. He was on the podcast. He has a line in a song this made me think about it. It's the darkness defines where the light is. And the struggle is where I'm going with, is that it seems to me the struggle defines elements that can allow us to be happy. What I mean by that is, I think it's a struggle, like the obstacle is the way, as the Stoics would say, is that we start to reveal what is meaningful in our lives. This is not a binary answer, but I'm going to ask you a question that's black and white. Do you think we can get to those levels of satisfaction and feeling content and meaningful without the struggle?
Again, if you look at how do you build strength in a gym, you have to put stress on your muscles. And oftentimes, if you look at research with people that have had a major health crisis or something like that, and then they've they've healed and they're, they say they had a cancer diagnosis, they're now cancer free. Oftentimes they will say, it's not that I wanted that or wished that to happen, but what has happened from that experience, I know more about myself. I'm stronger than I thought. I'm more resilient. I'm more capable. I pushed myself to do things I never would have done. And so, sometimes you hear about post-traumatic growth, right? Growth after. And so oftentimes it's not like we wish those things upon ourselves, but so we can see stress from that. But it's also...
Can you just double click post-traumatic growth for people?
Most people are probably more familiar with post-traumatic stress, right? But what we see is that going through some trauma and coming out the other side and building your self-awareness and, working through the issues, maybe now you've learned more about yourself, you've developed a hobby that you say you were super stressed and you started painting and now you love art. So often we can use those situations as a catalyst for personal growth or personal development. And so we see that, not always, but sometimes. And I think that when we sort of look, and so sometimes the stressors that happen or the trauma that happens is, it came out of nowhere. But we can also look for areas of opportunity in our life to stress out ourselves, to push ourselves to grow. Maybe you are afraid of public speaking. And so you go, volunteer to speak at something, or, maybe you're really introverted and you go to an event by yourself, right? Putting ourselves in those uncomfortable positions. Often we feel like something's uncomfortable and so it feels bad, right? But often that's one of those ding, ding, ding over here, growth. Yeah. So, for myself, I remember when I did one of my first TEDx talks, And I was getting my makeup done by my friend in the morning. And she was like, Jillian, like, what is going on with you? You're not breathing. And I wasn't. I was so anxious and nervous. And like, she is a friend of mine. She's done my makeup many, many times. She's like, I've never seen you like this. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so scared. And then I drove to Toronto, and my TEDx talk was in Yorkville at the library. And I remember sitting in the parking lot and being like, maybe I should just say I'm sick and go home.
Give me a reader. I'm done.
You're in Toronto. This was your dream. You are the one that like emailed them and asked to speak. And now here you are. And you're like, how do I get out of this? And so I finally like forced myself. But I remember driving home from Toronto because I was still living in London at the time and thinking, oh my goodness, I need to stretch myself more because I haven't been that scared in a very long time. And, I was comfortable and in grad school. And I thought, I want to start really looking for areas of opportunity to get uncomfortable and to stretch myself and to grow. And so we can all sort of do that life evaluation and find ways to really do that and stretch and grow. Because a lot of times when we, especially talking about like meaning and purpose and things like that, the root of a lot of that comes from that as well.
Got to get uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
You mentioned Barbara Fredrickson earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I find these micro moments of the savoring really lend well to her broaden and build theory, where like I've noticed myself, like if I'm outside running with my dad friends in neighborhoods, we're outside, we're socializing, we're doing things together. I feel much better. Then when I get these stress moments, or if I need to get myself feeling uncomfortable, like she said, I just have more of a resilient bank account to work from.
Oh, yeah. And I love Broaden and Build. So for those of you listening, so Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, so in 1998, she published a paper and introduced and had research to show this Broaden and Build theory. And what's wild about this is up until 1998, the leading theory in psychology was that say you were going through a hard time, like you're going through a period of grief or sadness, the sort of leading thought was you kind of suffer through, you grind it out. And then like the light at the end of the tunnel is that you can feel happiness again. And
That's the exact words people use.
yeah, and what Dr. Fredrickson showed is that no, especially when we are going through hard things, these micro moments, they don't just feel good in the moment, which they do, but they help to broaden our skills, our repertoires, and build our capacities, our psychological capacities, our social capacities. And so especially during hard times, these micro moments become even more important because they help to build our resilience and our capacity to handle things, especially when they're different. And the other thing I get asked sort of along these lines a lot is, and like today, like the world is really hard and there's a lot of terrible, awful, difficult, heartbreaking, sad things going on. And so a question I get asked a lot when I'm speaking is, how can I just find joy walking my dog or playing with my kid when so much is going on in the world, right? And so Broaden and Build is a helpful sort of construct to think about, because when we have these micro moments, they help us and build our capacity to show up better. But the other piece of it is that a lot of times people think, I either feel happy or sad, right? And what we see is that you can actually hold two emotions at the same time. And so it's actually a sign of psychological maturity to be able to hold a pleasant emotion at the same time as recognizing those things. And so, knowing that, and it makes you a better person when you have these micro moments to show up in the world. We see that happier people are more altruistic. They're more likely to help out in their community, donate time or money or resources. And so these micro moments, it's really like a macro huge impact, because we see that especially when we're having those hard moments or the world is hard, it's even more important that we focus on and we prioritize those things.
We were talking about Melissa Leong before.
Love her. Love you, Mel.
She was talking about how she can be very frustrated with her husband on financial decisions, but yet she can agree and understand and be okay with that. And she didn't say this, but I heard she's trying to feel happy or be okay with it, maybe not happy, but and hold the frustration at the same time. And I think you're right. It's a very mature of us from a psychological perspective to be able to hold those two things, because I don't know if we ever just have one emotion.
Exactly. And both could be true, right? And when you start to lean into like the paradox of life and to be able to hold multiple truths or explore multiple possibilities, like I said, it's a sign of psychological maturity. And It helps us to develop our self-awareness and to be more aware. Because I think we often want to like put people into like a little box with like labels.
Yeah.
And we are complex humans. And there is so much nuance in every conversation. But like all the time people be like, okay, Gillian, like what are your top 3 tips to happiness?
Yeah.
I'm like, I can tell you 3 things, but the conversation is so much deeper than that and more nuanced than that and more personalized than that. But as humans, I think we want to go to this binary thinking of it's this or it's that and yes or no this. And it just, that's not how we work. But we get uncomfortable, speaking of getting uncomfortable with those things because it's not familiar or it's harder to do versus just tie a nice little bow and call it a day.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the U Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show.
That's what happiness is. Ordered on Amazon. You're a happiness researcher, but you're a human. And like you said, there's nuance to it. What do you struggle with when trying to be happy?
Yeah. So, okay. I was thinking about, so when Jocko went for surgery, I was super anxious and I thought, okay, Gillian, you're the happiness researcher here. Like, what are you going to do? And so I thought, okay, apply all the tools that you know. So I was like, okay, he's going to be in surgery overnight. So I actually came to this building and worked at my friend's office during the day because I wanted to be around people. I made dinner plans with a friend. I went to the gym. And so all of those, I was still very anxious all day because my dog is in surgery. Like there was a reason for it. However, I was able to buffer as much as I could, right? Because the reality is some days are not days you feel happy, and that's part of life. But again, it's a practice. The happiness, like I say, if you want to live a happy life, you have to practice happiness regularly. It's not a perfect. And that was something that really took me a long time to get my mind around because I skew very like perfectionist. And to be okay with a practice, which the way I reframed it in my head that actually helped me shift my thinking was that I love yoga. I've done 6 or 7 yoga teacher trainings over the years. I love yoga. And you call it a yoga practice.
Yeah.
And I go into the studio and I never judge my yoga practice. But if I was at home that day and on my computer sitting for a long time, my hamstrings are tighter. And so when I go to touch my toes, maybe it takes me a while to warm up to even touch the ground. And I don't judge myself for that. I'm just like, oh, your hamstrings are tight. You were sitting a lot today. And so looking at yoga as a practice and looking at happiness as a practice, it's like we all have good days. We all have bad days. The root of the word happiness is luck, right? So there is a piece that sometimes good things just happen and sometimes bad things just happen. But the other piece of it is the active where we get our agency is in what is the practice that we choose to do. And so instead of judging myself as, you have to do exactly this every single day, like an example where I got really bad at this, when like morning routines first started becoming really trendy.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm on board with this. I love this.
5 a.m. club.
And I'm like, okay, intention to start my day. But then what happened is that it went from like doing morning pages to now it's like morning pages and meditating. And then it's journaling on this. And then it's reading a page from the Daily Stoic. And then it's a page from Robert Greene's Daily. And then it's the Grammar Girl Daily. And my morning routine became like an hour long. And I was like, this isn't working for me. And so, but I felt like I had to do everything because they were all good things. Yeah. And so what I do now is I wake up in the morning and I think, okay, what do I want? I start my day intentionally, but I don't do every single thing because I don't need to do every single thing every single day to be perfect, right? And so I read my daily books every day. I love that. But other than that, some days I want to stretch or like roll out with my like balls. That doesn't sound good. Tune-up fitness balls. Look them up. They're amazing. Jill Miller's amazing. I've done tons of trainings with her. When you do a lot of trainings, it just becomes like very conversational. So there we go. But
there we go.
Self-massage. but it just depends on the day and what I want to do. And I think that giving the grace and the flexibility of that has allowed me to understand that happiness is a practice. And some days you practice and you perform really well, and some days you don't. And that's life. And to get to that place, I think has been a really powerful shift, because I was putting so much pressure on myself to have to do everything perfectly. And by doing that, I actually took away, when I talk about like savoring or being present, when you go through the motions because items feel like they're on your to-do list, you're losing a lot of benefits anyway. And so I've really had to give myself grace and shift how I see that, to see happiness and to practice happiness as a practice.
I appreciate that, because the research around happiness, there's so many things that we can do, like you just said there, for your morning routine, for example. And if it's just a checklist, we're losing the magic.
Exactly. And, so I'm working on a book right now, and I'm like having a really hard time, because if I really sit down with this idea, so originally what happened was when I was writing my PhD, I was like, okay, like this is great content. And it was a lot of tools and strategies. What I did for my dissertation work was Berkeley is a 10-week online happiness course, and they wanted to pilot a shorter 4-week version. So we piloted a shorter 4-week video module, like on YouTube course, with undergraduate students at Western. I sent out one email, and the subject line said, "Do you want to learn how to be happier?" And I had done my like sample size calculation, and it was like, I think I needed 80 students. And I sent out, how they send out like the mass emails to students? I had 1,182 students respond that they wanted to be in my study. So that was cool. And then ethics was not cool about upping sample size.
Really wanting to be happy.
But so anyway, I was doing this online course, and when I was working with it, it was an educational video. So it was just like, this is what gratitude is. This is how you practice gratitude. This is social connection. This is why it's important. And even in 4 weeks, we saw a statistically significant increase in the happiness of the students. And so originally, and my dissertation was all about the tools and strategies, with a big focus on gratitude. And so I thought, okay, I want to take my dissertation, and like no one likes to read dissertations. Academic writing is repetitive and boring. But I thought, what if I take like the core of it is good, but just make it like something that I would want to read, right? And then I finished my PhD in November of 2019, and then March 2020 rolls around, and so book got the back burner because I was really busy doing a lot of webinars because people were not happy. And so now we're back, but I've been struggling with this concept, because if I really sit with the idea of writing a book telling someone how to be happy, it's actually a really disempowering concept, because I can't tell you how to be happy. I can't tell you listening how to be happy. It's a practice that we have to figure out ourselves. Like, can I say, we know from research that these tools, are more likely to increase your happiness? Absolutely. So it's like you can point the compass in the right direction, but at the same time, a lot of it is we actually have to, number one, figure out what makes us happy, and then number two, take action to actually do those things. And so a lot of the book is evolving now into, changing how we think about happiness, because that's step number one. And what's really cool now is that a lot of my research, so now I do research in psychiatry at the University of Manitoba. And what we're doing, it's really cool. We're integrating happiness with CBTM, so cognitive behavioral therapy plus mindfulness. And so CBT is the gold standard in psychotherapy, and very well researched. And so there's two pieces, right? There's cognition and behavior. And so with happiness, a lot of the research looks at happiness. They call it PPI sometimes, positive psychology interventions. And those are good. And that's what my book sort of started as, was like, talk about a bunch of PPIs. This is how you do them, maybe give some exercises. But now it's really evolved into, and part of the reason I think that cognitive behavioral therapy is so efficacious is that we focus on the cognition and the behavior. And so now what we're doing is we're integrating happiness with CBTM. So we're piloting it right now and like playing around with, in my department, we have, it's called the CBTM Hub. And so right now there's funding for anyone in the province of Manitoba. If you're listening in Manitoba, if you go to cbtmhub.ca, you can actually sign up for a 6-week completely free cognitive behavioral therapy online course. And so now we're adding in this happiness module to see, because a lot of CBT is about how do you alleviate distress, right? How do you reduce intrusive thoughts? How do you, stop catastrophic thinking or reduce catastrophic thinking? But there's nothing on that. Like, how do we build resilience and capacity and like focus on flourishing? So we're integrating all of that right now, which is so cool to see if we get better outcomes with adding the happiness as well into CBTM.
Very interesting, because you're in this psychiatry ward, which traditionally is more mental illness based. I don't want to make a broad statement, but positive psychology sometimes lends from the 0 to 10, the flourishing side. But you're bringing this concept to, I guess, the mental disease, mental illness side, hoping that it can help uplift people to make these decisions that align with healthier outcomes.
Yeah. And I love you brought this up, because there's an important distinction between mental health and mental illness, right? So when I take Jocko to CAMH and we're in crisis and critical care, the patients there are experiencing mental illness, whether it's schizophrenia or depression, whatever it is. And that's one piece of the conversation. And then the other piece is about how do you build mental health. And so my PhD is in health science and my focus is health promotion. So I've always been more interested in the how do you build mental health. But both are parts of the conversation. And I think, to your point, it's been very siloed, right? And so we had research day in November. So I went to Winnipeg and I told a room of psychiatrists that well-being is more than the absence of mental illness. So,
and
you know what? My department's amazing and they're very forward-thinking and open-minded, but I really feel like that's where the conversation needs to evolve to now, is that both are, important pieces of the conversation.
I don't want to cut you off, but you're talking about being uncomfortable and going in stretching rooms, call it. A positive psychology PhD in a room of psychiatrists. I mean, I have a master's, and like most of them throw it out, like positive psychology. So good for you, stretch, to go in that room.
Thank you. It's interesting because, so when I first started studying happiness, like I said, I saw all this data about how happier people are healthier. And, I sometimes get asked, is it a chicken or the egg thing, right? Where it's just that healthier people are happier. But now we have longitudinal experimental data that really shows that it is a predictor. And even during difficult times, it can help to buffer some of that. So it's a bidirectional relationship. But so I saw all this data. So I'm convinced that this is an important piece. And the other thing was, so when I was, I studied childhood obesity before. And in a childhood obesity intervention, a child has to have a BMI, a body mass index, above the 85th percentile for their age and gender in order to qualify for research.
Seems like it's high.
It's high. 85 is overweight, 95 is obese. But basically, with children, you actually don't want weight loss necessarily. What you want to do is slow the trajectory of weight gain and to establish healthy habits. Because when children establish healthy habits in childhood, they're much more likely to continue them into adulthood. It's like this window of opportunity. So essentially, in a childhood obesity intervention, you're talking about, physical activity, and you're talking about nutrition, and you're talking about stress, and with happiness. And then by having that, the outcome is better health, right?
Right.
With happiness, the byproduct of that is health, because happier people are more likely to engage in health promoting behaviors. So essentially, it was going after the same thing, but from two different perspectives, right? And so I could see this clearly, but what I started to find is that no one else saw it like that. And, it's interesting. One of the silver linings, I think, of the pandemic is that, so what happened was my plan was to be a professor, like my mom, right? I grew up in an academic world and my mom had a great job. She could come to my basketball games. I love research. But then what happened was I also love teaching. And so when I was in obesity, recruitment is really difficult. And so the problem with that is that if you don't get participants, you can't write a thesis, so you can't graduate. And so I'd have to try all these creative things to try to get participants in my study. And so we had like a little local TV station in London, Ontario. And I thought and they had like a morning show just for London. And I thought, well, if I go on there and talk about the research, I can kind of like demystify a lot of it and talk about the benefits. And then if someone calls me, it's a much hotter lead than me trying to go. We have this thing called the Western Fair, and there's like deep fried Mars bars. So I thought that would be a good place. I got like a booth in the pizza fun zone, and no one wants to talk to you there about obesity.
No, they're just going to the Mars.
They didn't want to. I even had balloons. But anyway, so I thought this is a better lead. And so I did that. And then after I was done, the producer, and I was terrified. Like, I don't know anything about TV. I had never done anything like this, but I'm a desperate grad student who needs to graduate. So you got to stretch, right? And so after the segment, the producer said, oh, you did a good job. Like, do you want to come back? Because I think they always think content. It's like London, And so I said, well, I only have one study, so I don't have anything else to talk about. And he said, well, you can just talk about like whatever you want. And so I was like, okay. And I was doing a lot of yoga and yoga teacher training. And I used to teach yoga on Friday nights to UFC fighters. And we practiced in the octagon. It was so fun.
That's
Yeah.
kinda cool.
And so I thought, okay, so I would go on and talk about like yoga or meditation or breath work. And it wasn't quite as mainstream as it is now. But by doing that, I realized that TV is teaching. It's just a different classroom, right?
Mhm.
And I was teaching at Western at the time, and I love teaching. And so from that, I'm also highly competitive. And so I thought, okay, after a while, I've done it in TV. I thought, oh, okay, well, Toronto TV is like the big TV in Canada. So because I didn't know anything about PR or media, and how I got on London TV was I just started emailing producers. So I just started emailing producers of TV shows in Toronto. And like a lot of times you can't find their email, but you can kind of guess it, like first name dot last name at Bell Media or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then I started Social it's the biggest daytime talk show in the country.
So I
Which
just
is
love
how-
how you guessed the emails, that competitive side of you. Just
Because a lot of them are the same for the whole
Yeah.
company, right? And so, which is actually how I met Melissa.
okay, yeah.
We met on the Social years ago. And so I was doing all that. But then when I was on TV, people started emailing me and asking me to come speak at their organization or at their conference. And I thought, oh, well, going and speaking is basically just like giving a lecture, which I'm already doing at Western, and there's no marking. So it's kind of better. And so I started doing that. But when I would go in, I almost felt like I was like a lawyer, and I had to go in and build this case. Why should we care about happiness? Why does it matter? And then to sort of the silver lining that I'm mentioning is that I really feel like the pandemic shifted the conversation from why do we care about happiness to what do we do about it? And that's been a big shift that I've seen in the happiness space is that, I mean, it's still oftentimes people come in with preconceived notions about what it is. But once you actually get deep into the conversation, happiness is a Trojan horse into a much bigger conversation about emotional resilience and about psychological flexibility and emotional granularity and all of these things. And so that is one thing that I think has been really good is that it is still very much siloed, to your point. And the fact that I'm studying happiness in psychiatry, or the fact that we're having these conversations is so much growth from when I first started in happiness.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
Oh, let me think. I always use I was like, was I married at the time or not? I use that as an anchor. So I actually started studying happiness and then I got divorced. So I'm a great husband, not great for me. So it would have been 12 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a question. I'm just trying to refine it. My curiosity was going into your little comment about you studied happiness and got divorced. Hey, relationships matter.
They do. And you know what? I got married really young. I was 25. And I started to learn a lot more about myself. And I realized that we just sort of had different goals as to how we wanted to live our life. I wanted to come to Toronto and be in the city. He did not. He wanted to stay and go to the hockey arena. So you realize, right? And we actually, I got divorced when I was 30. I was a very emotionally mature for my age, where we just sort of had a conversation about we're on different paths and actually had, as far as divorces go, like amicable. And but yeah, the person that you choose, the relationships that you have are a huge piece of your happiness.
And especially you just said you start to uncover who you are more and more, and yeah, sometimes that just does not align.
No, yeah.
I was going somewhere, and I'm not sure. I'm looking at the time here. I'm also very fascinated by, you called it a Trojan horse happiness. I find money is also a Trojan
Yes.
horse. I've heard you talk about common studies and other studies online about money and happiness. I'm curious about your experience being a happiness researcher, and then you got this thing called money. How have you yourself wrestled with the dance of money and happiness, and what roles do they both play?
So it's interesting because I grew up and I started working when I was like 15. I was a cashier at a grocery store. I loved my job. And I still, when I go to the grocery stores, I go to the self-checkout and I try to see if I can remember the vegetables. Bananas, 401 mark. Yeah. It's like a pattern. But in grad school, you have a very...
Say 4011.
Yeah, that is the code for bananas. And if you put a 9 in front of anything, it's organic.
Oh, okay.
the first code people learn always is bananas for some reason. So in grad school, and I paid for all my grad school myself. So I was paying for all my tuition, working, and I've been working my whole life. Like my parents always taught me, if you want something, they'll buy it. Or if I wanted like the designer shirt, they're like, this shirt costs this much. If you want this one, the difference is this, you have to pay this. And so in grad school, though, it's hard to live and pay tuition. So I was always constantly working so many jobs. So I was always stressed about money, working about money. And then when I finished, I had to go through this really weird sort of psychological journey is a kind word. It was harder than that. But I had to retell the story that I had about money because then, and when I first graduated, I wasn't at it. When I finished at Western, I was by myself. So I wasn't a professor in psychiatry at the time. And so I was making money doing a lot of public speaking and doing a lot of deals I did a lot of work with Reebok and Adidas with health stuff. And then it was I would get paid a lot of money for a very short amount of time. And then I would have all this other time. And then I started having this guilt because in my mind, I had always been you work, you get paid. I remember when I started, I got paid $6.85 an hour. And I think you got 25 more cents on a Sunday. But I was used to this amount of hours of work equals this amount of money.
Yeah.
And then now when I'm in this new space where you get paid a lot of money for 1 hour, but then nothing for other hours. And I had this constant gingivitis level guilt, that low grade guilt about I should be doing more all the time, more all the time, more all the time, more all the time. And I actually, and this is still an evolving process for me. I went to Hawaii over the Christmas holidays. My best friend got married.
Oh, nice.
And it was the first time in my life I did not open my laptop for 10 days. So it's still a process that I'm working through where I always talk about, productivity is not linear, right?
No.
And I had to learn that my relationship with making money wasn't a linear thing either. And so I'm getting better at that now. Taking a day off was just unheard of. And so taking a break really taught me how much more growth and work I have to do in this space because I came home just such a good mood. It was cold and we had a big snowstorm in Toronto the day that I got back. And I realized how much taking that time off charged my batteries. And then sometimes my speaking schedule will be so busy and it'll be boom, 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 boom. And so I have to learn this is the ebb and flow of the life that you are living, and to understand that money isn't just X amount of hours equals X amount of dollars has been a really weird narrative for me to kind of get my mind around.
What was different this time in Hawaii? What gave you the permission to not open that laptop?
You know what? It's interesting because a lot of times, I'll negotiate with myself, and I also do a lot of traveling. I speak a lot, so I travel a lot. And then what I'll do is I will tack on an extra day. And because what happened was it started getting to the point where it's I would fly, hotel, speak, airport. And I thought, this is you're going to all these beautiful places, see the cities. And so now, I'll speak in the morning and then go for a hike in the afternoon or something. So I've started to take a little bit more breaks, but I've always linked work and you have to earn your break. And in this case, so my best friend that got married, she has 4 kids. Her husband now has 4 kids. There's 8 children. So I'm very familiar with big families. So I was over the holidays, but I was with a big family. And we just, every morning we would meet at 9 a.m. for breakfast. And then we would do whatever during the day, go to the beach, go shopping, whatever. And then we'd all meet for dinner. And then I'd go back to bed. And so I was in this environment where no one was working. And so it kind of forced me into that, because if I would have brought out my laptop, they would have been
What are you doing?
So it just sort of happened. I also was you know what, I need a break. And I'll do sneaky things read a book, but it's a book that I want to read that Angela Duckworth's new book. I'm excited for that to come out or whatever. I'm learning and reading. And it's hard for me because I have very blurry lines between what's work and what's fun and play, because I love learning about happiness and I love listening to podcasts about happiness and I love talking about it and I love researching it. So if I'm doing a puzzle, I sometimes will tell myself is this fun or is this work? And it's both. And so I've had gray boundaries around that kind of stuff. So it's been a really just sort of the way it unfolded was an aha revelation of wow, no, you can take a vacation and you can unplug. And
You were doing the work,
Yeah.
being happy.
I was actually texting one of my friends and I said, I actually took a break for once. And my friend wrote back and said, like, I'm really surprised to hear you say that that you don't do that. And
Yeah.
I was like, huh, okay. Yeah. But oftentimes, like you said, like to your point about you just kind of go on autopilot and you're so focused, you can't pay attention to everything. And that was just one of those things that I didn't, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Do you ever find yourself wanting to learn so much, like you're just talking about here, like you're doing a jigsaw puzzle, but you're also listening to something that is in around happiness or other growth? And then think, this happened to me, that's why. And think,
Asking for a friend.
why am I not just, like, for example, I like hockey, and there's this podcast that's just pure entertainment about hockey, but I'm always listening to like academic podcasts, happiness podcasts, money story podcasts. And then I'm like, wait, part of it is enjoying, like being like ingrained and entrenched in a conversation about something that I enjoy. And I found myself listening to these, I guess, entertainment podcasts. And it felt good, but I was like, no, I gotta sharpen my tools.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever find yourself like,
Oh yeah, like if my
just not doing the work that we're researching.
like if my podcast queue gets really big, it starts to like stress me out because I'm like, oh, and I want to hear them all,
Yeah.
but then every once in a while, like mine, it's not hockey. I like to watch The Housewives, and I watch. For those of you listening that are wondering, I watch Salt Lake City, Miami, Orange County, and Beverly Hills. But I sometimes same thing. It's like I'm watching this show. I'm not any smarter having watched it, but it just you need some like mindless. Sometimes you just want to watch.
Just live.
Yeah, watch people yell at each other and throw glasses of wine across the table. Like, but it's like that again. That permission to have those, like to just listen to a podcast about hockey for the fun of it. Like there doesn't always have to be this goal oriented or productivity. I had this friend once who is still my friend, but was telling me once that if he goes to a situation or is invited to an event or something, he assesses the EV, the expected value. And if it's a positive EV, then he'll go to the event. And if it's not, he won't. And I was always like so confused by that because I would say, well, like, what about if you see someone you haven't seen for 10 years? Or like, how can you possibly assess the expected value of an event? And so my mind doesn't go that far, but I definitely am on that spectrum where I'm trying to always think, am I learning something right now? Is this important? Oh, how is this going to go with this? And I want to put this in my slide deck. I better write that down. Like it's a hard thing to do. I feel you on that.
You know what I've learned has helped? I'm in Alberta, so we got the prairies. A truck, a 6-pack of beer, not driving, and a gravel road sometimes with just going out to the lake. And there's no book to read. There's only water to savor, sunsets to enjoy. And it's just the best.
Oh, yeah. My best friend Jordan sometimes will be on the phone. She'll be like, Gillian, I think you need to go see your tree. I have this tree that I love. It's a big, beautiful redwood tree in High Park here in Toronto, and it faces the water. And redwoods are great for climbing. And so I'll climb up the tree and I'll just sit in the tree and I'll think and I'll meditate. And so sometimes if I'm like getting really wound up, she'll just be like, I think you need to have a timeout and go to your tree. And it helps.
That's good. I've never seen a grown woman climb a tree in a park in Edmonton.
It's at the bottom of a hill, you care. No, that's that right. But it's my favorite redwood in the city. The other thing to touch on that you mentioned is sunsets. This has been something huge for me. So like I talked about, like I'm a happiness researcher. So I read all these tools and strategies and I also apply them, right? I try them out. And not everything works for everyone, myself included. But there's just so many of them. You can't really pay attention to all of them at all times. And so there was this one that it just kind of like, never really caught my attention. And it was awe, AWE, awe.
Yeah.
And then I remember one time, so as we had a really long and like multiple lockdowns during the pandemic here in Toronto. And so things were just starting to open up, but like there wasn't a lot of events and stuff going on yet. And I'm very extroverted and I love going and meeting people. And so I got invited to an event at the ROM, at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I was like, oh, an event, I'm going. And it was a ribbon cutting they had just opened this new exhibit called The Dawn of Life. So basically now when you walk into the ROM, and the Dawn of Life is from like the beginning of time up until the dinosaurs, beginning of life up until the dinosaurs. And it's really cool because now they feel like the ROM is complete because they've got the full cycle. So I went to this event, and everyone was there. It took him 10 years to put this exhibit together. One guy said to me, I was like, why did it take 10 years? And he's like, well, it's harder to get money for a fossil than a dinosaur. And I was like, fair enough. So there was this rock on part of the exhibit, and it said, touch this rock. And like, that was when, remember, you couldn't touch things, right? So I'm like, oh, I can touch it. And so I touched it, took a picture for Instagram. And then I read, there was like a little caption beside this rock, and it said, you are touching one of the oldest things on Earth. This rock is 6 billion with a B years old. And I'm standing there, and I'm like, just originally it was just like a quick, let me take a photo, I can touch things, to like, holy, like, how do you think about 6 billion? And then I went home that night, and I used to live right across from the CN Tower, and my view was the water, and I was high up. And so you can see the stars at night, and I see them every night. And I went out that night, and I just was like so captivated by the stars. And then like the next day I was starting to notice things. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this is awe. And I didn't realize what a powerful effect awe can have. And to your point, especially when things are whatever, having those awe-inducing moments, whether it's, looking at the stars or listening to a beautiful piece of music, going for a walk in nature. Like, there are so many ways that we can create that opportunity for awe, but that has been something that was very unexpected, but extremely powerful for me personally in terms of getting perspective, shifting mood, creating micro moments. Awe, the sunset, big one.
Your story just makes me think, like, all these things I take serious, those moments of awe are like, chill the fuck out.
Yeah, right? It gives you that perspective
Yeah.
because you feel so small in amongst the vast universe when you're looking at the stars.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's a really good thing. Awe also, like on a physiological level, like reduces cortisol. It can improve our immune function. So there's physical benefits, just like with happiness. Like, that's the thing. I'm like, when we talk about it, it feels good. There's physical benefits, and it enhances our quality of life. And so,
Why not? And most times it's free.
yeah.
Seen the time here. Time flies. I'm gonna ask you 2 questions, but the first one is gonna be a short answer in the sense of, if you had to name your current relationship with your money, what would it be called?
I think we'd be like in a committed relationship, not married yet.
That's a good one. Okay. I feel like that's for many of us. My final question that I've asked everyone is, let's imagine now that you're at end of life. You're looking out at a view that gives you complete peace, ease, and feeling of content. You decide to write a letter on what was a key to living a meaningful life. What would be in that letter?
I was just listening to some of your podcast, so I should have come prepared with an answer to this one. Okay, let me think. I think I'm going to sort of talk to something that has been a big aha for me lately, which is that because I've been so like focused and, working a lot, I sort of lost a lot of like play and fun just to have play and fun. And so, like, even like I go to the gym, but it's training, right? And it's not just like, so now like I do Pilates on the weekend just because I love Pilates.
Reformer Pilates?
Reformer Pilates, absolutely. Mat Pilates is not the same. Reformer all the way.
Well, this is expensive. Anyway, sorry.
It's so good. A fun fact about Pilates, so I'm 5'3", and I've been 5'3" for a very long time. And actually, I was in this building downstairs talking to my friend's assistant, and she said she was 5'3", and then we were standing, and I was like a little bit taller than her. I'm like, no, like I'm 5'3". I've been 5'3" my whole life. And then she measured me, and I was 5'3.5". And I was like, huh. And I was just, maybe I was wrong my whole life was the narrative that I had. And then I was listening to Dorian Yates on Andrew Huberman recently, and he said he does reformer Pilates, and he thinks he's a half an inch taller because his posture is better. So I actually think it might be from my Pilates. But anyway, back to my answer is that I think like just doing things for the fun of doing things is something that is so meaningful. And yet I never appreciated it because everything always had to have an outcome or a purpose or a benefit. Not just like I went to my friend's house the other day and she baked cookies just to like bake cookies, and it was fun. And so finding more of those moments of play or adventure or, just being silly, watching funny things, doing that has brought so much meaning to my life recently because I never really did that before. And I think I would have just, would look like, I hope looking back that I brought even more of that kind of stuff into my life, that play, fun, adventure. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I feel like you gave me an episode title, The Secret to Happiness. Chill the fuck out. Thank you
It's not serious.
for listeners who want to find out more about you. Where would you point them towards online?
GillianMandich.com, and it's Gillian with a G, GILLIANMANDICH.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. It made me happy. So thank you.
Good. Me too. Thank you.
Dr. Gillian Mandich, she spent her career proving that happiness isn't a destination. And I really heard that on the conversation today. Instead, it's like a practice. It's a journey. And for many people, I hear them say, when life is hard, or I'm struggling, I'm not happy. But as Gillian talks about, those dark moments, the dark emotions, the hard emotions, they often lead to struggle, which perhaps paves the way for a happier life. Perhaps some of those struggles are just the point. I really like this idea that happiness is absolutely not a destination, rather it's a journey and it's part of our path. So my question for us all today is, what would you do differently today if you treated your happiness like a muscle instead of a goal? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. Thank you, and if you've been enjoying these episodes, these conversations, please subscribe here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, take care.